enough. And so if you do decide to go forward with a plan, I would suggest that you make sure when you meet a milestone that you've set, that you recognize that you share that information with your community, and you pat yourselves on the back, because that does show forward progress. The other thing I kept seeing over and over is this idea of community buy-in. If we're going to do something, we're going to do it collectively. We're going to make sure that the stakeholders are at the table, and that everybody in our community, to the extent it's possible, is going to agree that we're on the right path, and what we're trying to do to go from here to here is the right plan. Okay? Questions about that? Okay. So then the next thing, and I'm sorry, Jenny, if you can't see because I'm standing in the way, is improve collaboration among the different organizations and stakeholder groups. Over and over, that was a common theme and a desire from the survey that Jonathan sent out. The other couple of comments that kept rising to the top, if you will, when talking about the collaborative effort perspective, is how are we going to engage Culver academies? How are we going to get them to the table and maybe maximize, exploit, if you will? There were a couple of terms like that. Some of the assets and amenities that they bring to your community. The other critical thing that I kept reading was this lack of staff and funding to really be effective and to sustain some of these key organizations in your community. So it's not just about, and we've heard it, some of these folks are in shared responsibility, volunteer burnout, also the funding side of things. If you're going to look at full-time staff, who's going to pay for that, and where does the money come from? So these were two really key components of this idea of collaboration and stakeholder building that your survey, your comments, your thoughts, your desires kept shining through. Better promote, capitalize. I think somebody kept using the word exploit the tourism and who we really are here in this community of Culver. We heard we're the Hamptons of the West. Is that something to seriously consider as some sort of tagline? And if so, how do you build upon that? Again, making sure that you all have that unified message, regardless of the organization that you're serving, somehow tied into your social media, your marketing, or what have you. So again, that idea of the shared elevator speech. So if I come in as a potential business and I talk to any one of you, because maybe I've got kids and I'm going to reach out to Karen and maybe ask some drill down questions, or the bed and breakfast, or however I land into your community, am I going to get the same message or a similar kind of message about your community, about how you showcase externally who you are? And then I loved it, and I know where that came from because I know who said it, but this idea of making sure it's compelling. It gets back to what we talked about last week, about how do you differentiate yourselves. Everybody says we're great at this, we're great at that, we've got great schools, it's safe environment, and yada, on and on, but what makes me really remember you as Culver? It's not that you're great, because everybody says they're great, right? Everybody owns that adjective. So what makes you unique? What is that compelling message that we can all buy into? Yes?
Can I just ask you a quick question?
You may.
About key organization.
Mm-hmm.
What is the definition of that?
Well, some of them were spelling out, your chamber, your developed Culver, just the number of key partners that are sitting out there, Main Street, where you're sharing some responsibilities. Maybe there's some overlap, and we'll talk about that here later. But that's primarily some of the comments that were being, so I just looped it all into key organizations, because at the end of the day, you have a whole circle of partners, right? In growing your community, whether you're growing business, talent, residential, tourism, what have you. So that's that's me. I lumped it all into.
Oh, yeah. Like sometimes how you can self-define, I'm a key organization. But
yeah.
not.
I was really thinking about those external
Yeah.
partners that play a role in your growth, whether it's, as I said, whether it's business growth or downtown growth, residential, annexation, what have you, okay? Good question, though. That was me. I kind of lumped them all rather than spell them all out. But those were the ones, Main Street, tourism, so on and so forth, that were actually mentioned in the comments. Other questions? Because again, like last Friday, this is informal, so pop up like we did, you know, don't wait till the end. We'll talk through as we go through. Next on the priority list was diversity of your business growth. And again, this was some of the things that I read through the survey comments. Really, this was the priority, less resilience or reliance, I'm sorry, on this whole idea of the seasonal community and, you know, not banking all of your eggs in one basket, and how do we grow beyond that? So anything to do with the summer season, so that when you go into the winter season, how are you continuing to bring people here and bring in additional revenue and so on and so forth. This was another key component that kept popping up, was the need for more commercial, specifically downtown, and also making sure, and we'll talk about right here, making sure that you have locations where commercial, if that's what you want to grow, has a place to go or has a place to expand. It's not enough to say we want more commercial. It's about being prepared strategically for that kind of growth. And it gets down to here, making sure that if it's land for IT or, you know, some kind of advanced type of manufacturing that may play off of some of the assets that you have here from a targeted sector perspective, where are they going to go? Do you have land ready to go? Make sense? Yeah. Okay. And then target small to medium-sized companies. There was no spelling out of certain sectors or anything like that, but there were a number of comments about this size category, if you will, of business growth to your community. Target higher paying jobs. There were a lot of comments about we've got to set the bar higher on what our average wage is here in the community. But again, it's great to have these goals, but part of the plan is how are you going to get there? And what are you going to do? Well, you know, how do we engage the schools and Culver Academy? And we'll talk about all that here later. But this is really just kind of the desires, if you will, of the comments and suggestions that you all laid out. Diversity of housing options. While many of you said we're working on this, and good job, we got to wait to see how the paddocks play out. There was still a concern, if you will, or a desire that we continue to focus on making sure that diversity in housing options as we do these things, as we try to grow commercial or medium-sized businesses. Where are these people going to live?
Cheryl, I got one question
Yes.
from online.
Oh, yeah.
On the slide where you talk about the need for more commercial growth,
Yes.
they asked, could you kind of expand on that, or what exactly you had in mind? If there was a common theme there, is it all types of commercial, or was it, you know, was there a specific aspect of commercial growth?
No, commercial here, because many of the comments were talking about the downtown growth, and so commercial could also be retail type sector, small businesses that might be able to fit. Jonathan, you mentioned last week, maybe targeting engineering firms or architectural firms. Those would be considered commercial, and they also fit into this category of employment size. So yeah.
Mix commercial with retail and industrial. You know,
well, industrial is completely different. So, and I will tell you, great comment, Paul. There really wasn't very many comments about industrial growth. There were only a few. So to me, what I read into the summaries is this need to buffet downtown, if you will, to make sure it's resilient, and making sure that you have some of these commercial spaces available, and in addition to growing the retail side of things, whether it's fine dining or boutique shopping or what have you, but also as Jonathan gave the example last week of a great commercial business, is this idea of architectural firms or engineering or some other kind of service-based business.
I'm sorry, you beat me to the punch. I was gonna say, sorry, you saying that the people are focused on recruiting service-based companies.
Well, typically when people are talking commercial, that's what it is. It's a blend of service-related companies, either on the professional services side, which tend, have higher paying wages, or the retail sector side.
So I was just saying, so it was leaning toward not having any kind of company that would make any. I'm trying to use language so we're
Well,
all
and I would
concerned.
talk that, somebody that's going to make, we'll go back to the definition last week of the base businesses, those that are making some kind of product, whatever it is, that's going to go elsewhere. That's really more of industrial. So, but it doesn't have to be the form of industrial that a lot of us think, as I talked about last week. This could be very clean, high-end engineering, design, that kind of thing.
Because, so I just noticed a lot of people around here use tech as if like they don't manufacture anything. So if you said, well, we don't want to manufacturers, well, okay, that's Apple, gone, 3M, gone. I mean, there are tons of people who are high tech.
Yeah, you can still be a tech company and manufacture.
I just wanted to make sure we were.
No, the key here on the comments were really based on commercial and downtown.
Okay.
We're going to see later that, you've got to have a blend, so.
This is just first pass need too, with people saying.
Exactly.
Yeah, this isn't a final plan.
No.
Here's what
No.
we see that people we think need it, so you have to research it and develop it.
No, our last slide is about where do we go next. This is, thank you. This is just a first pass at your desires via that survey and those questions that Jonathan and Jenny are hungry to find out what key leaders in the community feel or desire or want. This is not a plan.
Sure.
This is a summary of your comments, your suggestions, your desires, AKA answers to the survey questions. Okay, great point. No, it is not a plan. It is not a plan. We'll talk later about, okay? Where did I leave off? We already talked about availability of sites and business. Great questions, comments, by the way. We already talked about, no, we didn't. I'm right here. See, I'm not crazy. I'm right here. Well, some would argue, but they're not here right now. One of the key things that popped up, and I think there were a couple of comments about making sure there's flexibility in zoning for mixed use properties or PUDs. I don't know. Do you guys use PUDs? So, and the comment about this one was, one of the things that came out of one of the comments, because like I said, there were a few deep general comment, is I guess you have some zoning in place that if you want residential mixed in downtown, that's not currently allowed. Is that correct?
You can't do the whole building residential, right? It's
Right,
like
so the ground floor has to be commercial.
So it has to be commercial or retail in
C1
that
district.
second floor, which is common.
Yeah.
Which is common for a lot of communities in their downtowns, is to have that second floor as residential. So, okay, so maybe this isn't a big deal, but it stood out to me. It stood out to me. So obviously Jenny and Jonathan are going to know the heartbeat of that, not me, because I've not studied your ordinance. Growing the population, this just came around over and over and over again, this idea of we've got to be thinking year round. We know that this year's been completely screwed up with COVID, and that a lot of your folks that have come in seasonally have chosen to remain here and kind of quarantine themselves here rather than go back. Some have gone back. So we'll talk a little bit about later about how do you maximize that and build off of that. But yeah, it was about thinking year round as we try to grow the population here, and then target remote workers. And we'll talk a little bit later about that. You're a certified broadband community. What does that mean? How do you tell that story, and so on and so forth. But definitely growing the population was a concern for nearly all of you. Questions? questions from online? I don't want to.
Anybody online have a question at this point? I haven't seen anything in the
We're
chat,
on
so.
time. Okay, we're good.
We're good.
Got an hour. Another one of your desires was focusing on the talent development and the whole pipeline of talent development and making sure that you're developing effective relationships with some of your higher ed institutions, other K-12 schools in your county, and both not only just private, but you have our public, but you have private schools as well. You know, how do we bring all of these folks to the table? Because, you know, Karen, as you said, you reach out to a lot of these folks, but who else is doing that besides you? You know, kind of talked about this workforce coalition. We'll talk a little bit more in detail about it later. But this was important, and I will tell you, as we talked last week, the number one search criteria is talent and being able to demonstrate it. So this, even maybe every single one of you said something about talent, I will tell you it's a foundation behind everything we just talked to up to this point. Okay, it all plays together. And so be thinking about this idea, if you're thinking about going forward with a plan, it has to have a multi-pronged approach. And this has got to be a focus somewhere. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to add, I didn't put it in the survey, and I wish I did, but along those same lines, and I know this is important to Karen and Jenny and people have talked about this, but pride of community at a young age should be a part of that talent. If you've got young people that feel pride in this community, then they're going to be more motivated to end up here, whether that's right out of college, a decade later, it doesn't really matter, but that pride is such a big deal and it's rare. I mean, you hear young people, I can't wait to leave, and not just Culver, anywhere. And I think that's a huge thing that's where that stump speech, elevator speech is a big deal. If us adults, us leaders, whatever we are, continue to give pride to our young people, that's going to do nothing but further our foundation for growth.
I really agree.
The retention of our talent.
Yeah, just a desire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, talent development is not just attraction,
Yeah.
and we'll talk about that here later. But no, fantastic. I had to write that down. Pride in the community, youth.
You get an extra cinnamon roll.
You do. You do. You can take one home. You get to take one home. No, I completely agree with you. If you can, and that's why last week, I don't remember if I said it in every session because the discussions were different that led to, you know, additional side conversation discussion, but there is a statewide, and it's the largest one in the country, youth pitch contest called Innovate Within. And they are demonstrating how if you can get your kids engaged in that kind of activity, that as they're creating, they may implement in your community, which does what? It kind of helps alleviate some of that brain drain. So you're exactly right. It's about seeing the benefits of being here, because most kids are going to go, I gotta go to the big city, and whatever the big city means to them. Well, what we find over and over and over, and it doesn't matter where you are, the data shows it, and Indiana is a perfect example. When they get to be in their late 20s, early 30s, and they're thinking about having a family, where do they go? They generally come back home. And there's data to prove that. And why? Because over and over, I kept seeing safe family, and we'll see that here later.
So that's part of the problem though, is do they see this is home or this is vacation? Like, I would love every home on the lake to have their second generation come back and live here and to bring their kids and grandkids, you know, like that would be a great asset to all of us. But the view is, this is the second home, like you can't flip that, or maybe you can.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
Yeah, where they spent their summer days.
Yeah. And they want to keep it that, I mean, that's a family tradition. I mean, you go back and look in the archives, that's like, remember the summer?
But even a small percentage of that contingent is a big.
Yes, it
You
is.
know what I mean? 10% of that is,
Yeah.
wow, look what we've done. You know what I
like
mean?
yourself. You're a good
Yeah,
example.
Yeah, I guess I am.
What's your story?
No, my story is boring. My parents bought a cottage right when I.
Why are you a case story?
No, my parents bought a cottage right when I graduated high school, so I didn't grow up coming here. But, you know, from high school through college, went to college in Indianapolis, never in a million years thought I would live in Culver until I was maybe 60. Somehow I ended up here at 31. And we'll never look back.
Business has to.
See? Woo! Again. Yeah.
No, but I mean, the point is, that's exactly, the thing is though, Karen's right. If you get anyone that is interested in here, whether it's to bring a business, start a business, work, it doesn't matter, raise a family. I mean, that's how you get that.
That's where the crowd comes,
Resident,
you know,
yeah.
that's where, as a school corporation, to design things, focus on, what do I do here in the winter months? What is it that would attract people?
Make the kids pitch Culver, have them come up with.
Well, you know what? Why aren't you a testimonial on the school's website? Even though you didn't go to school here, or on the tourism website, or the chamber's
I think
website.
the girl in front of me is a better example because she stayed. She went to school here, she stayed, she started a business, she came back with her family.
Oh my
So
God.
I'm sorry,
But I could not do that if it wasn't for my husband having a job in Chicago. So the problem is the jobs, and I had to create a business in order to give myself a job.
but you did.
I did,
Would
but
it be
also,
easier if you had good jobs here that?
if you had jobs to start with here, that would be huge. And also, the housing market was totally different when I moved back here in 2011. I don't know
Yes.
now if we would have moved here with the price of the homes, because what they went up to, and they still need just as much work. And when I moved here, I mean, we basically had to move heaven and earth to move here. We gave like rental management companies 3 months to find us rentals, and we had 3, and I cannot tell you how bad. And we had to order all of our furniture for 2 years because all of the rentals are furnished. I mean, there are a lot of hurdles to moving back to this community as a second generation.
Yes, very true.
So
Unless you're paying the
as
bills
much as I
in the
love
house.
this community, I understand why most people that I graduated with, I'm 38, graduated in 2000 from Culver schools. I understand why they don't move back here. We have to bring college level jobs besides education.
That's that knowledge, talent that we talked about.
Yes.
And the flip side of that is we also enjoy a lot of taxes, you know, because of the level of the housing. So it's kind of a two-edged sword, you know, we're this little tiny town, as my husband always says, we'd be Kiwanis, you know, without the lake. And so, and it's true, we just be this little tiny town. So on the one hand, that's the price of the property here. And on the other hand, you know, you got people sitting in these houses that pay enormous taxes that we benefit from. So it's, you know, it's.
I was really, like, I was so bummed that the Bestie property did not go through, because I
Right.
thought that is something we really needed, is those $250,000 homes, and we didn't get those, and I understand why it didn't happen, but we need those for families to want to move back here and enroll in our schools and whatnot, because not everybody can, you know, has good enough credit to get a construction loan and everything else, which is what you need to do to live in these homes, to bring them up to the level that, you know, of modern amenities,
Right.
garages, attics, basements, you
But you're
know.
probably not talking 250, you're probably talking 150. You know what I'm saying, you got to,
For
because,
the county?
well, I'm just saying from other meetings I go to where people are talking about the same.
Price point is home.
Oh, yeah, they'll hit 130 and say, hey, I can't afford anything over 130 or whatever. So you really start talking to people, 250 is still well.
Well, I guess I'm
paid.
saying if you want to attract people back from Fishers and,
I
you
think
know,
she means more new, Lee.
Oh, okay,
I
okay.
think new and just turnkey.
Yeah, I think-
Oh my gosh, look what I
I
have.
think if you have a
Most
college
people are gonna
degree,
jump
you know,
in.
you're paying $200,000, $300,000 for a home right now. You know, but we just don't have that inventory
Yeah.
anymore.
Yeah, I mean, we
Those are
have
different.
houses that are listed at 250 that seriously are tear downs.
It's the word, yeah, because
It's one of my
people,
streets.
yeah, real estate agents will say, oh, we
Tear
have
down,
the inventory,
250. They list as
There's
house.
no-
not turnkey, not turnkey.
There's 30 properties on the market right now.
Town to incentivize people that do want to live here year round, as opposed to, this is a story from the bed and breakfast. I was sharing coffee with a guest one morning, chit chatting about how our business was going. This is about a year in, and I said, well, you know, things are going great. You know, there's a need for us here, doing the work. I I said, well, my one great lament is we only seem to get our guests for 1 year. And then one of our fine real estate agents here in town got a hold of them and said, why are you paying nightly rates? I can sell you a house and in 4 years when your student graduates, we'll turn you a profit. And he was like, yeah, that's really terrible. The next night he came to me and said, we don't need our last night here because we're buying a house upstairs. So he took the idea, ran with it, called the first agent he could find and figured out that like, I've got 2 kids that are gonna be going to school here, so I'm gonna need it for 6 years. So this is great. You were right. Thanks for giving me the tip. We're like, oh.
Well, and there's 2 things the community can do. So like Wabash, they offer that incentive for first-time home loan buyers to help with their down payment, and it came through, I can't remember what the source of the money, I don't think it was CRC. I can't remember. Anyway, the other thing is like West Lafayette, they have an ordinance that you can't buy a home and make it now a rental property in a certain radius of Purdue University. And it's because of that factor, parents would buy a home for 4 years because that was cheaper than paying Purdue $80,000 for their kid to attend there. So you can still make that ordinance, but if that, it also might shoot you in the foot, because then it causes people to sprawl, which in a sense for us to sprawl is not a bad idea, depending on which way that sprawl occurs. Because you can go across 17.
Unintended consequence, so you have homes that don't turn over here, they're too expensive for people to buy, and then you have people buying homes on the other side of 17, they're too expensive to buy for others. So what you have here, Cheryl, is an issue for a subcommittee to work on. Because housing is complex here.
It is, I mean, yeah, everything you do can.
But I would also say, as far as a bed and breakfast, because I'm on BZA, they try to stop people from having a house with, and then renting, like, they were carriage house, I'll use it, it's like a garage with something above. And I'm like, boy, that, horses out of the barn. I mean, everybody rents something around here. And I've literally seen BZA vote people down for taking a portion of their garage and converting it into rental space. And I'm like, or not rental space, additional space, I should say. I'm like, why are you doing that? They're like, they're gonna rent it. And so there are a lot of levels of that. I don't personally see a problem with it.
Well,
I mean, obviously people feel that, right?
Right, well, it's not fair stat, because I always refer to it as the cot in the garage, and you got an Airbnb.
Right.
They don't have to pay the level of homeowners insurance and taxes that I'm paying to do it as a full-time business, but they're just raking in the cash because, hey, they can, so it's.
And the overhead is not.
Right, exactly.
If you can full circle, I agree with you, I mean, not to interrupt you. I think the number is 47%, maybe you know, Cheryl, it's up there for actual just tourism.
Yeah.
47% of tourism, or in the 40s, high 40s, come from people you know. So what does that mean? That means if you build a housing development and you're in a seasonal town that people like to enjoy, you might get your friends and family to visit you more, regardless of your age, if you're in your 20s, early 30s, whatever, because you can afford a house, you're drawing people want to stay there and breakfast. Shops. I mean, it grows from there. I mean, so it all starts with that year-round, full-time population that have places to live and jobs to work at.
If we only have one.
The developer, I mean, this issue's so complicated. Look at when we did Stellar, we were willing to actually have town dollars invest in the affordable housing. We did infrastructure, our redevelopment commission invested in it. We literally looked at every location we could think of in the town of Culver. We had one developer willing to work with us because he believed so much in the mission of it. If Kevin had not said, I'll give you my land to do this, we would have been SOL, because none of the developers want to put up housing they're not going to make a ton of money on when they've got this opportunity to make a ton of money.
Or even any money.
Yeah,
Any money,
and
actually.
even when we try to purchase land to do the project, we had 0 people willing to sell at a rate we could afford, and Culver Academy is the largest homeowner or landowner in the county who needs the housing more than all of us combined. It's like, nah, we're not interested in selling you land to do this housing. And our purpose of the housing was actually to benefit them. So it's a steep, complicated, but we got one step of it done, even to the chagrin of some people who said, this is the dumbest idea ever. But, you know, yeah, we'd love to all solve that one overnight, but I've been on council 13 years and wanted to do it in year 2, and we finally got part of it done. But yeah, we need a task force.
Yeah, you need a plan. You need a group. Next up was the involvement of, involvement of the seasonal population. And some of the discussions we had last week from you all centered on this as well, and then it came through on your responses to the survey, is how are we going to get them involved, not only financially perhaps, but actively engaged as volunteers and those
We
folks
took a
that
big
will
step
come.
in that last summer. Huge step.
Well, then maybe that's something you can build off of.
Yes.
You know,
Need
but yeah, there's got to be, you've got a huge asset in those folks, and I get that they come here every year for the lake, but I'm sure if you talk to them and had a community focus group with them to find out, okay, I know you go to lake, where do you go to the store? You know, what are some of the things you'd love to see here, and blah, blah, blah. And oh, by the way, you know, would you be willing to work with us on a task force to try to address some of these things? So, you know, I'm sure they're not out on the lake 24/7. If they are, then we're all in the wrong business.
Well, I think though the problem with the seasonal population is the fact that these people are probably heavily involved where they live the rest of the year. They come up here, this is a respite from that. I don't see them as a real source of a group that's, you know, going to get involved here during the summer. I think they want to get away from it. That's why they come up here.
I agree.
No, and
Checks
that
are
could
easier to
be,
time.
but have you asked them? So my point is, you know, again, pulling, I don't know, 24 into a community focused discussion and finding out directly from them, because you may be right. Maybe they don't want anything to do with this community beyond the lake, but we really don't know that. We're making assumptions about that.
I also think your assumption is correct too, because I think if we really did an inventory of the talent of the people around the lake that they retired from, each one of them have a special little niche that they still have a passion for. Some of them it is volunteering time to do, like Blessings in a Backpack is a prime example. Total volunteer program. They raise food to give money to the kids, and they do it through the summer too. And that's seasonal people. So if you found the right passion and talent, same thing with Lake Mac Environment Council. Those are seasonal people too, and they take care of the lake, whether they're here or not here. And so I do think if we had an inventory of talent.
I think there is a difference between seasonal retired professionals and active.
Yeah.
That's how I took that from Bill, like an active seasonal, someone who has their business or career or whatever, you know, in India or Chicago, and they come here for the weekend to get away. I think those two are easier to get advice and a check. And I don't mean to, you know, demean them to that, that's a compliment.
That's a good purpose.
And they love it.
I disagree with you guys, because I think, you know, and honestly, I come at a lot of my change from what Paul and I did for a living. We were in executive search, okay, so they're always calling on people, calling companies, have to build relationships, they pay you a lot of money to find people, they have to like to know you, and vice versa. So my orientation is always like, you know, sitting here and saying, well, get out and call on, you know. So I volunteer for one little organization, and, you know, the pieces of my, like, can I call companies for money? And they're like, oh my gosh, can I call? I am so shameless. We've raised so much friggin' money this year. We've got 2 corporate sponsors. And part of it is just because I have no shame. I mean, on a certain level. Call on anyone, I'll talk to them, I'll pitch something, I go back to them. And then we, you know, you need that for any endeavor. And that's why I disagree with the people on the lake. Partly, I got one toe in the door with somebody on the lake. I'm like, who are your friends? I want to ask them for money. You know, I don't want to sound overly aggressive, because I've been from that friend expanded to other friends. But partly when we talk about incorporating each other and explaining why we do what we do and explaining what the organizations do, these people actually really want to be involved.
They have a passion, yeah.
They do want to be involved. And I would add on top of that, for our professional organizations in town, that we be professional. We have business standards, because these people, that is their world. So if they look at us like they don't have their act together, or they don't follow protocol, or whatever it is, then they're not going to want to join, because it's they're I don't know what the right word to use, but there's no interest in it if they don't think it's run professionally.
Well,
Or has professional standards.
it goes back to, because I didn't really have experience on community foundations, but I was the director of grants and scholarships at Johnson County Community Foundation for a number of years and started that program. You know, funding 101, ask,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
We go, oh, we don't think they're gonna, we don't think, but, you know, sometimes people are just waiting to be that phone call.
It is not a community that is totally overtapped in that category.
But I do think it takes a strategy. You know, Lee, your comment about, you know, all these organizations, they need to be professional. You also don't want to have 15 different organizations calling on the same. You want a strategy about what we're gonna ask them to do, how are we gonna get them involved, that's right.
Totally agree.
So
Yes,
right
Andy.
now is kind of your opportune time to involve some of the seasonal on the lake, because most of these corporate jobs, I've been told, they're not going back to a minimum of next June at the earliest possible, if not
Absolutely
later.
right. Yep.
So granted, I'm a little different, I don't live in your, I mean, I'm down here and I'm invested, but, so I don't see always as you guys are from here 24/7, but I think this is your guys' perfect time, because they may be staying. This is your chance to maybe bring them to here full time.
And you don't know that if you don't bring them to the table and
Yeah,
have
if
a
you're not going back
conversation.
to work in a corporate job till minimum of June, and they say they don't plan on that yet, like,
Or ever.
or ever, I mean, you have that chance with your broadband, you have the chance to get some of these that are working from home, that maybe they may start up some smaller, and more people. I mean, you're in a perfect chance right now with everything going on to get these seasonal become more permanent and invest in your community.
I laughed when you said that.
I'm sorry, I didn't. Oh,
So
let's
I
wait.
think it
Wait,
it starts with the seasonal population. Okay, a lot of, to build with it. I was a seasonal population.
What? See, now I've got 3 stories right here, testimonials.
And now I'm a permanent. Okay, it started, you know, learning about Culver, and it's kind of like, to me, internet clicks, right? Okay, in order for people to want to live in Culver, they got to step foot in Culver. Okay, you're not going to read about it and see the videos. I think the videos were great. And, you know, Mark did a great job of everyone did. The professionals, I've shared them and used them in my business. I'm also a realtor. I see a $200,000 home now these days. Your monthly payment is what it would be a $150,000 home 5 years ago. Okay, so you know, take a step back from these prices, look at the monthly. Okay, and a lot of times newer homes, you know, can be more affordable because there's less expenses and things like that. So I still think pushing for these new homes are good. But I think everything begins with the seasonal population. Okay, getting people to set foot in there. Okay, those are where, and I've got all kinds of stories. I know all kinds of people around here. I sold a house to a young couple that he works for an investment firm, she works for a pharmaceutical firm. They live in New York. They're going to be in Culver for the next year at least. They've been in Culver for the last 6 months. I know another girl I sold a house to. She's a professional, right? And she bought the house. She's living down here now. She was saved up her money for a down payment, bought a house, and now she's operating out of here. And I've seen dozens of this right now. I know plenty of people that came down here, bought homes, and now they're staying there. You know, I think that one of our biggest problems is housing, is staying in Culver, right? You know, when you talk about, I don't want more ordinances. I really don't.
No, I agree.
Yeah, I don't want more restrictions on homes. I think that is a big mistake. Okay, if you want to help people, don't restrict them. You know, I forget the other stuff you guys are talking about.
So what is the age of these people? I mean, are we talking
Well,
30
okay,
plus
so
or younger than?
The young couple is 29 and 30. The other young lady, she's in her 20s. Another thing I want to say, I did read a study not too long ago that more young people are choosing first where they want to.
Quality of life.
Yeah.
Okay.
We
and
talked about
then
that last week. Yeah.
Choosing where they want to work.
Yeah. And the other side of that, I don't mean to interrupt, but you had said that the one couple were in their 20s. That age group is also the age group that wants to get engaged. They want to do impactful work and they want to make a difference.
Mhm.
We talked about that last week, that the young professionals, it's about the quality of where I'm living and the things I get to do, because if I'm working at night, because I'm on the lake all day, that's okay, because I've got that kind of job. I'll find a job that lets me do that. So they really are choosing where to live and then figuring out the jobs later, as opposed to, my generation, it was like, you go where the jobs are. It's not like that anymore. I keep wanting to say Wendy because I told her I have a girlfriend, but it's Mandy. You're right. I think COVID has presented you an opportunity. And to be talking about planning and visioning now and how we engage, and instead of making assumptions about them, bring them to the table to have a community conversation. Here's what we're trying to do, enrich the life you already have here and enjoy about Culver. And we would love to have your thoughts and opinions. And I think you'd be surprised. Many people just want to be asked.
I don't remember whether it was Ginny, and it might have been, I just had so many conversations, but someone was saying, we're talking to a Culver person, owns land in the area or whatever, and he was saying something like, I get involved more if you guys had your act together. And I think that sense of, it goes back to having a professional presentation. We're talking about the elevator speech and all that we all have the same vision, and so that we know if we're sitting in front of some people trying to engage someone, that we're all saying the same things that we want to try to accomplish.
And that is investment in the community. If you're truly investment, then you need to be part of the change agent and not waiting for it to change for your.
Yeah. I just have to shrug off people.
Because that's the same thing with the schools, like, well, we come there, if you had this and that, I'm like, well, bring the child here and then we'll offer that.
And when somebody makes a comment like that to me, I'm going to drill down. What do you mean they don't have their act together? Give me a specific, don't sit and gripe to me. Give me a specific example about what you experienced that you feel so-and-so person or organization didn't have their act together. You know what I'm saying?
Well, since I was only hearing it secondhand, but to me, when I hear something like that, particularly from a very successful business person, right? I'm thinking that they're looking for business basics about what you're trying to accomplish. So if you come to me to ask for me to invest, right? Then what is that? What is the pitch? If you can't tell me the pitch, don't ask me to give you $250,000 or $28 million for land. I want to know that you know where you're going. That's what that comment means to me, but getting it secondhand, I couldn't articulate what it is, but that's sort of on the surface of it.
But it also gets back to strategy, right?
Yes, exactly.
Great comments. It's Wade, right? Yeah. Great comments, all of you. Thank you. We're getting close to the end on the mutual desire. So strengthening your relationships, not only at the county level, but also at the regional level and with your state partners. And so, to me, this speaks that there's a sense of disconnect, that maybe we're not as engaged as we should be. And so Ginny and I and Jonathan actually talked about maybe her opportunity to get in at the regional level as your elected official. So we may have an opportunity there at the regional economic development organization and getting involved more with some of the initiatives that they're doing, so that we're not working against what they're trying to do, but we're complementing what they're doing. And then this popped up too a couple of different times in having some kind of more increased focus on the cultural arts here in your community. And this was a specific point that was put out there in one of the comments that, should you have some kind of, performing center for the arts or something like that, how do you, I took this to mean, how do you incorporate more of the cultural amenities in addition to the recreational amenities that you have here, especially if you've got a higher level of clientele, so to speak, with affluence.
What do they look? So is that a facility look or a?
Oops, who did that?
Or an image? Or an image?
Did I touch something? I took it to be a facility. Okay. Education. That was the wording. Educational Center for the Arts. That was the wording.
That
Well,
came up a lot.
the academy provides a lot of free educational,
Yeah, they do.
and cultural arts. I
Do
mean,
people know that
And it's free.
on the
It's
lake?
free.
Not around here.
No.
Nope, we don't talk about that stuff.
They're also a little bit isolated about it too. Like, I mean, yeah, they offer some free to the public, but it's a little bit of a limit.
I mean, it's amazing some of the
Higher ed
things you
mentality.
go see at the academy. Off-Broadway productions
Yeah.
happen at the.
What?
Yes.
Yeah, it's extraordinary.
That could be something in the welcome packet though, if we develop that more people understand about that. Because I will say that when I first moved back here in 2011, we definitely went to the Epley Auditorium and would go to, if they have Christmas play and things like that. I love that I could do that with my children. And I just feel like, this whole Mayberry thing, it just feels like a college town, like in the middle of nowhere, And I left that community to move here. But I left a community that was a suburb of Columbus, Ohio. Westerville was like one of the top 25 in Fortune magazine places to live. But I was like, all they're doing is recreating what we already have in Culver. But what we don't have is those jobs that were available in that area. So
I do like the idea of, even if it's not a center, just, we do, I mean, Jonathan and I have talked about this when we were doing Stellar. We almost have to do art with intention because it's not something we as planners in the community really think about. So like even our trails, we could do some really cool sculptures to sort of highlight the fact that there were Indians on this lake and, or some other aspect of our culture and history. And that's expensive to do in some cases. I mean, I found this great art sculpture artist who does international work and
That's the kind of
living,
things that'll get donated though.
yeah, living right down an hour and a half from us in Audubon, Indiana, of all places. But she's amazing, does work for Purdue and tribes in Africa and just every form of sculpture you can imagine. Her husband's an artist too, but I started thinking, man, that'd be so cool on some of the trails we're putting in. So when you're biking and walking, you could, see these things, whether you're a visitor or local.
Look how popular the Culver sign is.
Yeah.
It's art.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, it's $5,000 and everyone gets a selfie by it, which helps create that marketing word of mouth that, goes viral and takes off without us having to do so much work.
Do you remember our first run at Stellar, the art girl sitting at that table? She hated us. She's like the only one that
She's
hated
like, I don't know what's wrong with
us. She'd
this.
be proud of this conversation.
And the killer is now
She was the only one.
now she loves us though,
There
right?
you go.
Because the regional arts and culture committee that got formed when we did regional Stellar, I think she realized we finally figured it out. But we also engaged Corey Humes at tourism and we were much more intentional. And we had actual artists join that committee.
But
yeah,
you
it's
raise a
intention.
very, very good point. If you don't have an inventory of your resources, and if you don't have this idea of a network or a database of your resources around this lake, how do you know you don't have some world-renowned artist or sculpturist or what have you, And I've seen that, the city of Greenwood does a really good job of sculpture and art along the trails, and they switch it out. City of Columbus does the same thing. Now, again, they are big cities, but the point is, it just changes the feel of the trail as you're walking and biking or pushing your child, and there's opportunity to educate. So yeah, I think again, strategy. How do you pull in all these different?
Well, and Cheryl, the other thing that we have is the academy. I think the Indian sculptures and stuff over there needs millions of dollars of stuff. I think the Huffington's anteed up for that. And I'm not sure, that could be rumor, but they could be approached to do something for the trails. People love that kind of thing, that they would think so much of it, to donate so much money to buy sculptures, right? They might want, maybe they had a few that the academy didn't have room for. And
We need to get you on the fundraising committee for
Well, I'll tell you, I would call
this
that
initiative.
And you've got your community foundation. There are a lot of organizations out there that fund the arts and they fund the education. But again, it gets back, yes, ma'am.
Well, and yeah, I believe that was my comment at the bottom of there. And that's kind of the whole point of it, that there is a resource out of Indianapolis where you can get grant money for cultural advancement in your town, and here in Marshall County, all that money's going to Plymouth. Plymouth is a great town, it got a really cool downtown area, but it's largely a blue-collar town. We got the perfect palette for a place where people that want to come and have art festivals and sculpture trails, all 9 yards. This town hasn't been ruined by, you gotta pass 5 factories to get over to this part of town, and is it safe, and how far do I have to walk, all that sort of thing. There's a town in western New York, East Aurora.
Oh, yeah, I've been there. We have my husband has family
Well,
up there.
that's where we lived originally, and
It's beautiful.
well, that's half the reason why we live in Culver, because we love the Roycroft Inn, and when we came to Culver and we saw what was then the Main Street Manor, it's like, it's hidden under a lot of garbage, but it's in there, so.
I love the village feel, and you have that ability to do that. And I think it was maybe your comment. You know, there are a lot of communities trying to create things you already have here. So how do you capitalize on them and elevate them? You know, so yeah, East Aurora, yeah, it's beautiful. That whole village and cute boutiques and yeah, love it. Okay, great comments. What'd you do?
I didn't do anything.
Some other comments that kept coming up was the repurposing of the bank building. I'm not sure what the bank building is, but there were about 3 comments about the bank building downtown. So I don't know whether, you know.
Sorry. No, I was at a meeting a year ago. I thought they were gonna put me up against the wall and hose me down with Uzis for like saying, the bank building. They're like, no, it should rot and fall down. You know, I was like, oh. I just think that if that could be repurposed into something, whether, you know, I won't say what my idea is, but like that it would absolutely transform the downtown.
You know, is that a historic landmarks?
No, it's a big old ugly building. but,
Okay, all right.
It needs to
It
be.
is historic. No, it's not historical.
I mean, you know, it was, the bank was here for 100 years before it failed and got bought and then bought again and bought again, but it just where it is downtown, and I think it'd be made pretty and house some things.
But it would take a huge invest, like it's a
$5 million project.
Yeah, they looked at it and.
But you weren't the only one to say it.
Well, no, that makes me happy.
Yeah.
Shows you what difference a year can make.
Yeah. The other was exploring annexation. You know, maybe that's a way to grow your community, is to maybe think outside the boundaries, the current boundaries today. And then, oh, and I meant to put it on here and I forgot, but there was the comment about the campground, so we can't forget about that, you know, that this is maybe a possible way to bring additional revenue into your community. And then finally, on the knowledge-based sector plan that Jonathan presented to you all, the majority, almost nearly everyone that responded to the survey, they liked the concept, they were for it. So.
The concept is a targeted recruitment.
I'm sorry?
The concept is a targeted recruitment of businesses that are good for the town that take us where we want to go.
Yeah, and again, it gets back to what's your plan?
Yeah.
You know, how are you going to target?
There's a connect button on the bottom. I think we just stayed on the same slide for so long and lost its.
Oh,
There we
so
go.
just
Yep.
push it.
Yep.
Okay.
Jimmy, whatever happened with the entrepreneurial hub idea for, wasn't that regional cities? Is that still on the table?
It
or
was
is there
an
funding?
idea that Jerry put into regional cities really without any prior buy-in or discussion.
So it's just kind of dead.
I think it's still like a word out there.
They tried to do it through regional stellar, but Oprah disqualified that as a potential project. So MCEDC still had it on the radar, but like many things from that organization, nothing ever came of it. So ideally, I honestly do think Culver would be primed for that. The entrepreneur program at Culver Academies, the remote workers, co-shared type of space is possible. Again, the bank would be like prime opportunity for that, but we also have a strong connection to Notre Dame, and they've got the idea, what's it called?
Idea Week.
It's called Idea
Week.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, there's like so many connections we could make from a networking standpoint. And I I think, I actually talk to people about it all the time. I just personally haven't had time to focus on that as a priority. But I do think it's one that should be part of our plan.
Okay, great conversation and comments from all of you. And I think actually every single one of you have commented, so yay! All right, so I want to take a little bit of time to talk about the emerging themes that I saw from the Post-it note exercise that we did in each of those 3 sessions. So, you know, my wish for Culver is, what I want Culver to be known for, or write your headline for the community in 5 years. So those were the 3 different questions you could choose. And so what I did is similar to the survey that Jonathan pushed out, is summarize the comments into categories. So the first one, and I'm going to spend some time on this, so I'm going to try, and we've got like 25 minutes. If you have to leave, I'm sorry, please leave. Or if Jonathan's going to throw a ball at me, I don't know. But the first one is talent development and attraction. That was constantly something that was coming out in those comments. And so I'm just going to throw out examples of maybe what you could do in this area. I'm not suggesting this is your plan or recommending. I'm just trying to give you food for thought as we move into the final stage of figuring out where we go from here and what's this plan look like and how do we set our goals and so on and so forth. So one of the things is on talent development and attraction, that I see work effectively in communities is forming some kind, and we touched on it last week, forming some kind of workforce development coalition. And we talked about if your Lido hasn't been doing anything in that area, then maybe Culver is the catalyst to make that happen. Maybe your community reaches out to the other communities throughout Marshall County and creates this diverse stakeholder group where you've got the higher ed institutions, you've got your community college, you have Culver Academy, you have the K-12 public and private sector, you have your employers, you have other key stakeholders like your chamber and so on and so forth, where you're all in the room talking about and creating strategies around how are we going to do some of the things that we've all been talking about this morning with regards to retaining talent, helping existing talent skill up, and preparing that pipeline. Is it the Innovate Within student pitch contest that is open to any student, any high school student in the state of Indiana? But what it does is it encourages entrepreneurship, right, and creativity. And I will tell you, some of the very most successful kids that have gone through and won the competition are not your straight A, I got a 5.0 GPA, because, we're probably going to see that at some point, right? And, when we get out in the business world, did that 5.0 make a difference? No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. But if you can get some of these creative minds engaged in your community, it goes back to what you said, sir, about pride in the community and that investment, okay? So if we're doing that, the K-12, how does your career exploration tie into your local employers, or does it? Explore the idea of internships. Do you do company or business tours for your kids today? And I'm not just looking at your school. If we're looking at some kind of coalition, I think it really does need to be at a county level, but without leadership currently at your Lido, again, like we talked last week, be the catalyst for change, And then if you are looking at certain kinds of manufacturing, maybe you look at participating in a manufacturing week each year, which is a national program.
We do.
Okay. You do, but do the other schools?
We all do.
Okay.
We're all in a cooperative.
Okay, good. The other thing, we talked about the incumbent workforce, there's the next level jobs and everything that the state is doing from that. Apprenticeship programs, making sure that your employers are aware of it's free money. And oh, by the way, we're all paying into it. If you pay any kind of payroll tax, that goes up to Department of Workforce Development. So why not make sure you're making those connections? On the talent attraction side, your regional partnership, maybe you don't know that, the South Bend Elkhart Regional Partnership has an IT sector, they call it the Regional IT Sector Partnership. Are any of your companies in that area, or are you as community leaders aware of what's going on with that particular initiative and how do you engage further with it. You know, do you have career fairs or do you participate in career fairs here? A lot of them are going virtually and they're being very successful actually, and very little work on the community level. It's just more about promotion and awareness. On the business sector identification and attraction side, you know, figuring out what's the best fit for your community. You already have identified through the survey, those of you, and again, that was about half, liked this idea of the knowledge base, and whether or not you like that term, it is the Internet of Things type business sector. The one thing I want to challenge you to not discount is the technology-based manufacturing subsector around some of the key assets you already have here.
Totally, thank you.
Then
You have the lake.
those are $60,000 a year jobs
Absolutely.
that are career discounted, thinking that,
The not knowledge based, yeah.
So, you know, I look at the lake and I think, okay, what about water-related equipment R&D? Where you've got a manufacturer that's using the lake as a test site for diving equipment, or, you know what I'm saying? And thinking about, you know, as I come here, I see all those beautiful horses and the equestrian center at where Culver Academies. Is there an opportunity to build upon that subsector and the support sector around the equestrian call it, I don't know, equestrian environment, where, you know, Culver and the community is looking at proactively trying to attract support services around that, whether it's equipment or training events or, and I don't know what all they do there. I haven't drilled down into it. I love seeing the horses as I come into
Come
town.
Sunday at 2 o'clock, you'll get to see them come through town.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. But again, how are you capitalizing, and I loved again some of the comments, exploiting some of the things you already have here in your community. And sometimes, as I told Jenny and Jonathan, it's about grabbing that low-hanging fruit. Instead of trying to recreate the wheel, you've already got some wheels, maybe you just need to network with those wheels. But it's figuring out what you think the best fit is. And so if it's Internet of Things with the knowledge-based sector, don't discount the technology-driven side of R&D and manufacturing. And some of these places, I'm not talking about bringing in an employer that's making, or bringing in 500 employees. That's not realistic for this community. But if you can bring in over 5 to 10 years, 10 companies that employ 10 to 15 or 20, 25 people, were you saying hallelujah? Did I see your hand go up?
Oh, yeah.
That'd be great. What, you know, and again, most of those jobs pay extremely well. Extremely well.
We have a $90 million company right in Union Township, which is our school township, right? And you think of them as just this big boring ag company. They've grown through acquisition. They have a whole sector that does nothing but all the techie ag services stuff, you know, with all the surveys of the land and all the technical things about how you can be a better farmer, and hell, if we could just even bring them a company to acquire. I mean, that kind of stuff. I never hear this company's name come out of anybody's mouth. And I'm like, God, they're $90 million and they're right in our backyard. And nobody ever talks about them. I think sometimes we don't even know what's here, you know?
Well, the other side of that on the business sector identification and attraction goes back to what we talked about last week, is this idea of business expansion and retention, having that visitation program. And while you guys do that with your Lido, I would encourage you to do it at a local aspect too, and create those own relationships at the local level. The story development, marketing and outreach. Oh, wait a minute. I had some other notes on the business sector, and we talked about it earlier, so I won't spend a lot of time, but identifying where some of these new businesses and new companies might go, and making sure that those sites are prepared and ready to go, whether it's, you know, that might be able to be rehabbed, or it's finding land that's properly zoned, and so on and so forth. So that all goes into that. In addition is understanding the site selection process. You know, what does it mean to try to attract a company? How do we need to be prepared? to sell it as a team and sell it with a unified voice. And then making sure, and again, some things we talked about last week, making sure your incentive tool chest is full and ready to go, and that everybody's on board with creative uses of those tools that you might be able to use to attract some of the companies that you wish to have here. On the story development, marketing, and outreach side, we've talked about this ad nauseum, the unified message, making sure that everybody buys into whatever the message is that you want to project externally about Culver, whether it's to do business here, to live here, to recreate here, or just to come and work here, okay? You know, should you contract with a professional for 3 to 6 months to kind of seed that process for you, somebody that, and I have people in mind that I'm more than willing to let you talk to just explore the idea. Is this something, and it's you know, one in particular will tell you honestly, you know, where to go from here and blah, blah, blah. But I think it's going to be important as you try to push that message externally once you get ready to push that message externally, okay? And your use of social media tools, we've kind of talked about that last week, some of the disconnect that I experienced as an external person looking at all the different websites, trying to find some of the websites, just making sure that the websites stay current. And again, once you get this unified single message ready, making sure that everybody has that somewhere on their website as a tagline or what have you, so there looks like it's a true partnership throughout your community and that the network is plugged in to one another. The other side, we talked about this last week, the idea of doing podcasts. Again, lots of people have windshield time and spend time listening to things, especially the younger generation. What a great way to promote some of the cool cultural and recreational things that you're doing here that maybe if I'm not truly engaged, I wouldn't know unless I heard about it on a podcast. Also thinking about your Facebook pages and boosting ads. Once you figure out who it is you want to target specifically and where you want to target, it's really cheap to boost on a Facebook ad for group. It's very effective to market through Facebook. And then we touched a little bit on it last week, this idea of maybe looking at certain key markets of metros that you may want to invest in billboards or find partners to assist in helping sell on a billboard. Organizational effectiveness was a nice way that I put all the comments that I kept seeing about the different key stakeholders and the lack of staffing and the lack of funding and concern over sustainability and concern over overlap, and how do we make sure that we're all truly working as a unified, well-oiled machine. And so, you know, it goes without saying, what are the areas of overlap? Can you tell me today 5 areas of overlap that all of these organizations are doing? You may think or know of a couple, but can you really put it down on paper? You know, identifying the gaps in services that are being provided and any resources. You know, are there gaps today that with a few tweaks, we might be able to close that gap a little bit? And joining forces versus co-locating to maximize the economies of scale and to maximize staff, funding, and resources. You know, we've had that conversation last week about, you know, this idea of co-locating into a single building. You talked about it again today, Jenny, this idea you have got to think about some sort of co-working space. It's not a trend, it's not a fad. A lot of people that are working remote today want to get out, get away from their house, believe it or not, and go where other like-minded people are. And having a space to do that, even if it's a small room, smaller than this, it's still having that option and being tied into the Indiana Passport program, which is the statewide network of co-working spaces all across the state. And it's free to be a member and to get your name and your site on there. So just, again, thinking about how, and you know, I like the analogy that the mayor of Crawfordsville, I talked about last, the fusing of these created entities, that we can bring them all together where they're actually meeting. And that's one of the other things, you know, what are you doing to meet together on a regular basis to share challenges, to share opportunities, to share resources? You know, are these groups coming together on a regular basis to talk to one another and to figure out ways to work better together? You know, so what strategies are in place to ensure the sustainability? I heard a lot last week about board and staff and volunteer burnout. What's your plan to mitigate that? Do you have a plan? Do these organizations have a plan to mitigate that? Increased collaboration locally and regionally, somewhat a little bit goes together. I already talked about the idea of stakeholder organizations meeting together just to share solutions and challenges and so on. You know, encouraging engagement and accountability with your Lido. I heard that over and over and over last week, and it came through on those Post-it notes. You know, if you're investing in that organization, there's a level of accountability that you're owed as an investor, right? And that you really should be seen as a partner. And if you're not, that needs to be repaired somehow. Yeah. Engage with the South Bend Elkhart Regional Partnership. We talked about that. Engage with your organizations and stakeholders and other communities here in Marshall County. Again, this idea that we may have other resources at the table that we're not tapping, other creative ideas that we're not tapping, because it gets back to my comment last week. We're really looking at trying to raise the level of all boats. A win here is a win for Marshall County and vice versa. And then develop relationships with some of your other key stakeholders that maybe you today don't have. I've talked to Jonathan, I've already made that call, by the way, about the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, which is the state's economic development office. Why aren't we working directly with them, or at least why don't we know who they are? And it's not bypassing your Lido at all. It's also because you're a community, and why would you not want that kind of relationship if you're going to look at strategies to drive growth, to at least be tied in and at least know the names and who to call if you need help or questions at the state economic development level. The other thing is tying into your local Work One. You know, you're all part of a region for your Work One office, which is the local training and so on for Department of Workforce Development. And again, going back to making sure your companies are aware of training dollars and things like that. Sometimes that's driven by your local Work One or coordinated by your local Work One. So making sure you have relationships with them. And then also your Small Business Development Center. Same thing, you're part of a region for the Small Business Development Center, which is a state program through the federal SBA. So if you are creating that incentive tool chest, that quiver of arrows, you want to make sure that if you've got some entrepreneurs thinking about coming in here and starting a business, if they come knocking on your door first, what's this quiver of arrows that I have, and the SBDC should be one. And maybe what you could do is ask your SBDC rep who handles Marshall County to come to your community once a month, so that anybody that's thinking about starting a business or wanting to take their small business to the next level, they know on the second Monday of every month, my SBDC rep is in Culver. Okay? Youth involvement, that came screaming through as well as a theme. And then we kind of talked about this idea, and was it your name, Mark?
Yep.
Yeah, because I already made my note that, you know, this pride in the community. You know, do you have a youth leadership program? I went on your leadership, Marshall County, and I didn't see anything about a youth leadership program. Is that something to explore? Jenny, as the president of the town council, just because you're not a mayor doesn't mean you can't have a youth council. Again, we make so many assumptions that we know what our kids want, but how many times is a youth voice at the table of anything? Yeah. And it's not you, that's common practice with adults. You know, we think we know what's best for everybody as we're planning. But the reality is when you're planning, bring that voice to the table that you're talking about.
The good news is Leadership Marshall County is looking at that to develop a youth program.
Nice.
We did for Stellar.
We were somewhat successful on the regional level working with youth when we went through that, like we did a big workshop with kids from all of the high schools. They loved it. Their input counted. It actually became part of the plan. Some of them, in the middle of a blizzard, came down for the presentation we did to the state agencies.
Wow.
Then turned around and interviewed the kids on the spot, which those made us look way better than we were at this particular initiative. But so regionally, I think there's a lot of some of these things happening. Jonathan and I and a few other people in the community have been involved in some of those regional efforts. It's just hard to get other people, like Karen sat on the regional education committee. We had Tracy Fox locally sit on the health committee. So sometimes I feel really bad and guilty when I ask people to get involved in county regional initiatives, because it's like, I would love to have Mark and Brandy involved in some of the stuff we did there, but then I would feel awful because I know how burned out they are. But the good news is there is some regional activity taking place through the group that did stellar. They formed a permanent nonprofit so that those initiatives could carry on beyond a stellar implementation, which I think is a great thing.
Well, and I don't want to suggest that, you know, it's like the elephant, how you eat an elephant, it's one bite at a time.
Yeah.
And I know we hear that over and over, but it is reality. And, you know, this idea of engaging at the regional level or the county level, maybe it's later, whatever later is for all of you. But, you know, trying to build a foundation locally would be, I think, primary to the work you want to do. And, you know, if you don't have some way to engage your youth, and I've seen some youth councils work really effectively, you'd be surprised. And it's, you know, a lot of kids are out there, they want to get into government or they want to understand politics, but these kids are really smart, you know, getting their voice added to, you know, bike ped trail, you know, what do they want to see? You know, do you have a dog park? I mean, you'd be surprised at some of the ideas. No, bad thing? No,
Oh,
bad
no.
mojo?
We're connected on the
stuff.
dog.
Yeah.
program.
Okay. I'm just using that as an example.
We have a secret dog park.
It's,
They have a softball field, it's great
I
dog
work-
park.
I worked directly with a youth council that we formed in Crawfordsville, and then I worked ancillarily with some other communities have them, and I was shocked, actually. You know, I think we come in jaded, you know, when we're working with the youth, and because we, you know, the news always seems to showcase, or social media showcases the worst, if you will. And some of them are really, really thoughtful and creative, and kind of what you're doing.
It'd be great to
Yeah.
have them in the council room.
You know, service learning projects.
Projects on them.
Yeah, do you do service learning projects with your kids, and how diverse is that? Is it just all on the school to do it? You know, are you putting youth on some of your nonprofit boards? You know, I'm hearing burnout of volunteers. Let's not forget about some of these high school kids and how engaged they can get into what you're trying to do. Increase year-round population. You know, one of the things that kept coming is that this is a safe environment, this is a safe community, it's family friendly. I kept seeing that over and over and over. I will tell you, oh, I thought you were pointing at me, getting ready to throw something at me. This is going to be the biggest challenge, right? Growing your population. It's nice to have a plan to develop all of these that you hope makes a difference here, but just recognizing that this is tough. But we've already kind of talked about, you know, how to engage the seasonal people and figuring out what that plan or strategy looks like. You know, target marketing. You know, are you doing that currently through tourism, what have you, or is it just really about come recreate here, as opposed to, oh, and by the way, think about living here. You know, it's utilizing. We've heard 3 stories just here in the last hour and a half that we could use as testimonials, right? I did grow up here. That's why I came back. And I know you talked about the struggles and the challenges, but all I kept thinking about when I listened to your story was there was a burning desire for you to be here, or you would not have endured all that, you know? So that's a testimonial as you're trying to market to people that might want to live here. Targeting the entrepreneurs, I can't speak enough about that. You know, these people, they dream, and what do? They implement. And when they implement, what does that mean? That means money, right? That could mean a base business, or that could be a non-base business, but that leads to green. Who said that earlier? I think it was, there's red and there's blue and there's green. I wanted to tell you a little bit. One of the things I was telling Jonathan about it as I was doing some research, as I went through all this to kind of do some drill down. Brighton, Vermont, they're a small community, and they're a skiing community, and that's what they're known for. Everybody goes there in the winter to ski. But they were having the exact same conversations you all were about how do we think year round? How do we keep this level of activity and revenue coming into our communities beyond the winter months? What do we do in the summer? You know, how do we market our in the summer to get people to still keep coming here? And so one of the things they did is they brought together a coalition, and they set up a strategic plan around this idea of year round. And they set up 31 different festivals, and none of them are related. And the most popular one that is still going on today is the Girls Just Want to Have Fun weekend. And it's all geared around women. They could be any age, but it's a whole weekend. They use local bed and breakfast. Woo, shout out bed and breakfast. And they have Tai Chi, and they have massage, count me in. And just different kinds of, so it's a learning, but it's also a relaxing. Thank you, sir, for coming. Bye. It's just another way, and these women come back every year, and what are they doing while they're there? They're dropping cash in that community.
How much my understanding is that used to take place here. Like the Cove used to be like the Mary Kay conference of the nation, and but then the things become
open.
what?
Maybe the first year they were open.
Oh, is that what? Okay, and now I'm going on hearsay or whatever, but there's a price point that people will pay for that. And that's what I think we've priced ourselves out of homes, we've priced ourselves out of conventions, how do you come back from that?
Well, I think you need a plan. I think you got to sit down and talk it through. You know, have you priced yourself out of convention or events? No, I wouldn't say that. And I don't even have the data to back it up. It's just thinking about how are we going to create an opportunity to bring people here, and what does that cost us to do? And, you know, again, it goes back to partnerships and having the voice of your bed and breakfast in some of the places where they're going to stay. And, you know, is everybody willing maybe to take a small deduction that first year just to get people here? Because it goes back to everything I've been hearing. If we could just get them here, we just get them here. So what's the cost of doing nothing?
So I wrote that down, like under pride and community and want married families. We have to give them somewhere to get married. I got married here at the Cove. 3 girls that I graduated with got married at the Cove in June of 2007. 2 moved back after moving away. And when I was on the chamber for 7 years, that really bothered me when the Cove stopped having weddings. Because I was like, where's my daughter gonna get married? She's 15 now.
When you can't use the chapel.
And when I was in, like, you know, the academies cracking down on weddings, if you don't want to get married in a barn or in a sailing garage and you want 150 people plus, there's nowhere to get married in Culver. When I was at Purdue, fraternities would come and have their winter formals at the Cove. So there were ways that we were attracting youth to our community, and we don't have that anymore. Unless you're affiliated with the academy. And even then, now it's tented outside, or I think they're even cracking down on the Woodcraft Dining Hall, even being a place where you can get married. But most of the people that stayed in this community that I graduated with got married here. And when I got married here, my husband's family from Fort Wayne, no one even knew what Culver was. They were just like, wow, what is this place? Mm-hmm. It's a whole nother way to bring in that seasonal tourist attraction. And now it's even easier with the Airbnbs and VRBOs because we have a lot more inventory for people to stay. But it was also, you know, we had our rehearsal dinner at the Edgewater before it was the Lake House Grill. You know, we ate at Cafe Max the next day. We would have used Legacy Salon, something like that. Like it was an economic, boost, and we just
And you're
don't
right,
have
a lot of
that.
that money leaves when the reception venue is 40 minutes outside of Culver.
Yeah.
Because you have a lot of people get married at the chapel or the local church or on the lake, and then they take their party to another
They go to
town.
Plymouth, I've been to weddings up there.
Yeah.
But isn't there some, I had it saved on my phone for the longest time, because like, I had never even heard of these guys. I just had a conversation with someone why we don't market Culver as a wedding destination. And it has to do with a lot of, infighting that we all talk about, you don't want to market somebody you don't like, kind of thing, but it wasn't a barn. I'm trying to think who it was over on the lake. It's in my head like Curry or.
Curry?
Oh, for
Or
sure.
yeah, the furries,
Yeah,
right?
that's
Well,
a
barn.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying, there's outdoor venues, but if you wanna get married, like I got married in June, I don't particularly wanna be outside in great weather, and if you, so there's the barn, the Overmeyer barn, and then there's Becky Curry's, which is great if that's what you want, but if you want an indoor venue.
Yeah, that is.
You want the
We don't
same
have-
hotel that you stay in.
But I totally agree with you. I think we are a fabulous wedding destination. That is.
And it would help it would help downtown shops, it would help
Totally.
so many of the small businesses on these busy weekends, and, I mean, you can talk to people from early 2000s, the downtown businesses, and they'll tell you, like, what an economic impact that had.
Yeah.
But there was just,
Community center.
Yeah, events are huge economic engines. And so maybe that's a task force.
I couldn't agree more,
Is there
but
anybody that comes to these gatherings that's representing the Cove? I haven't been in town long enough to really.
well, Kathy Cusero, when she was the director of the Cove the last few years, she was trying to bring events back. But they also hadn't invested any money into the ballroom, and it's aging, so. But there were a good, 5 years at least where nothing was going on in
So
that.
Cheryl, there's no one thing that happened here. A meteor did not strike this town in 2009. It changed everything. A lot of what's happened has just fallen off. And by applying people and some resources and time to really investigate it and figure a plan out, there's a way of coming out of this. And we can have multiple layers or multiple legs to a stool for this town to really grow.
Yeah.
And so there's nothing that just said we were rezoned, we were anything else. Was that bullshit? The point is, as I'm hearing all this, it's a matter of attention. And
Yes.
that we have resources to deal with. So
Yeah.
that's a good problem to start to deal with, yeah.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right, and it all goes back to what, having that long-term vision and addressing each of these things. If you collectively, as a community, believe these are your priorities, but it has to start
We have not
someplace.
been there, and
Yeah.
that is part of our problem, but this will get us there.
Yeah, there's also the town undergoing some planning in terms of buildings we've acquired or potentially going to acquire. We want to do some public engagement on the old Pinder's Restaurant. What do we do with that? Do we do a community center? We have council members who think we should put up a police station there. I personally don't agree with that, but if we engage the community, I suspect several people would come back with a community center or venue for a wedding, or, we encased that room right there because we knew at least we could get a few more tables out there, because this needs to be a venue, but this is pretty small for that type of thing. But you wouldn't believe the people who got honked off that we actually had the nerve to put the windows enclosed out there. But yeah, I think we do need to, and I think we're going through so many new planning phases as the town. We feel like we just got done with Stellar and now we're back at it again, but.
And I think the Lake House Grill adding their banquet room was huge, because I also planned, I have 4 sisters. So I planned baby showers and bridal showers, and back when I was planning it, before he had his banquet room, it was a beach lodge. And it was very outdated, but we made it work. Or, I rented tables and put them up on my house, things like that. But now, we're having these smaller venues, which is great, but what about the larger, attracting those larger weddings and whatnot, events?
So just a few more comments about the year-round population, making sure that as you work in that direction, that you're targeting the remote workers. And so you're talking about the infrastructure that you have in place to support that, because we've already talked, some of these companies are finding out they really don't need physical space for some of their employees and the jobs that they do and the positions that they have. So that means people are going to be working remotely from home or from, community area or what have you. You're perfectly positioned. You're a certified broadband community. If you have high-speed fiber internet here, you need to be waving that flag to those people that are going to be working from home. And then just a continued focus on your housing inventory, which we've already talked about. The last thing was making sure that as you're doing all this, and folks have commented about being innovative. And so what I want to say about that is, I think just the fact that you are here and you've invested in these discussions to at least get some preliminary input and feedback and comments from community leaders, business leaders, already is demonstrating that you can be innovative. So now how do you take it to the next level, right? One of the things that I like to talk about is this idea of civic infrastructure, and that's really what you're doing. And so what is civic infrastructure? It's the conditions, activities, and systems that allow people to connect with each other, work together, solve problems, and create a thriving community. And in essence, that's what you've been talking about for the last I keep saying 2 days, but the last 2 Fridays, we'll say.
Or 3 years.
Yeah. So you've heard me say it. I'm one of these people that pushes. I'm an out-of-box thinker. If something's the traditional way, and I hear somebody say, "But that's the way I always want to do it," I want to kill them. So there's a reason Cheryl doesn't carry a weapon, because I feel like saying, "Really? Well, what about this?" Or if this is the fee for a certain level of nonprofit, well, why can't we create another level for the smaller guy? That's who I am. And so I love that you guys are wanting to push. And so it's like I said last Friday, be that catalyst. And I love this. If you don't do it, when are you going to do it? Is now the time? I'm hearing from you guys. You're perfectly positioned. We've already talked about the benefit, unfortunately, that COVID has presented to you as a community. I love these 2 quotes. Great things never come from comfort zones, right? And change is inevitable, right? Change is going to happen. You can control it, you can direct it, or you can sit back and be reactive. But progress is what? Optional. The way to get started is quit talking and begin doing. From Mr. Walt Disney himself, which is a good segue into this action plan for change. So this is my recommendation to you all. It doesn't mean you have to work with me, but I would recommend that you start thinking about how are we going to build a collaborative community coalition. I do recommend that you have it facilitated. It could be, maybe there's somebody at the community college, or I'm happy to help and continue to work with you. I don't want to suggest that, hey, pick me. But as I've worked with you guys for the last 2 Fridays, this is where you got to start, because what does it do? It brings that diverse voice to the table. We've already talked about some of the people that aren't here and haven't been here in these last 2 Fridays. When you start thinking about a true community collaborative coalition, partnership, whatever you want to call the adjective, it helps you identify these people and bring that voice to the table. And it keeps you from assuming that you know best for them. Because we've already talked about there may be some tremendous resources you haven't tapped because that's a them. Those people around the lake, those seasonal people. It helps provide additional buy-in, and it's a way to get people engaged, because now you're ensuring a spirit of team and you're creating that champion. Somebody has to drive this process, okay? It cannot be a plan. You've got to have a champion that says, okay, folks, we're going to split up into these 3 task forces, and this group is going to do this, and they're going to be responsible for that, and blah, blah, blah. It doesn't have to all fall on Jenny or Jonathan or whomever to raise the money, to reach out to people. Having a coalition spreads out that responsibility and spreads out that ownership. Make sense? The other thing I would recommend is that you invest in a SOAR process. I use SOAR, that's who I am. because I'm not a big SWOT fan. It's the exact same thing, but I'm not a fan of the threats, you know, because it just tends to make people think way too negatively. Whereas with SOAR, it's strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and then you're talking about the results. How we're going to get there. So it does the same thing as a SWOT. It's just a more positive experience in you know, from my personal preference. And what does a SOAR do, or a SWOT? It's going to aid you in identifying that unified goal. And I'm using it as an example, you know, taking this from good to great. Doesn't have to be your goal. That's just my example. But what? Pardon?
It's fitting though.
Yeah. But what is that goal? What's that overarching 30,000-foot goal? Further defining the emerging themes. We've talked about these themes that you all, it's your voice. You told me the themes. I just lumped them into categories. But it helps you further, like you've been doing today. We've kind of drilled down with discussion through some of the hurdles that you've seen and the challenges that you've seen or that you're experiencing as a community with some of these things. By going through a SOAR, you can actually identify specifics and start really drilling down into that particular theme. And then figuring out what's the scope of the vision, and it will actually help you create and develop that plan. Because then you're going to figure out the specific goals for those themes. But what it helps you do is prioritize. Okay, we had a big list of themes, didn't we? Those were not in any order of specificity like the survey was. So what's critical to moving forward? What were those themes? Because those are going to be your goals towards that vision, right? This is a biggie. It's one thing to say, yeah, we got to do this. Okay, well, what are you going to do to help us get there? So you're assigning responsibility for goal A, goal B, goal C. And maybe that's a team or a task force for goal A, goal B, goal C. Defining your outcomes and how you gonna know if you're successful. And then finally, how are you going to keep the community informed? So when you have this plan, these are the things that you will identify in your vision. Call it a vision, call it a plan, whatever you want to call it, but it's your roadmap. And we know that a good way to keep the community engaged is to make them feel a part of it. And you can do that by keeping people informed of your progress and what you've been doing. So it's kind of a strategic plan light. Because a lot of people don't like the term strategic plan. They think that, you know, year-long process goes on the table someplace. Nobody pays attention to it. One of the things that when I do visioning and planning, I like to use, it's called strategic doing. And what it does is you're going to be meeting basically on a 30-day schedule. And if you've got individual task force to deal with the specific goals or themes, that group's going to be meeting within that 30-day period too, but everybody's going to come together as that community coalition because that's the leading advisory group, if you will, to drive this process. Once you form your coalition, it's that coalition that's going to go through this process. And so you may come out with 4 different task force or teams out of here to address some of the overarching 4 biggest, I'm saying 4, it doesn't have to be. But what happens is when you come back every 30 days as a big group to talk about your progress, to talk about your challenges, to say, hey, by the way, team A talking about talent, you know, can you help us with? It's a way to keep people engaged and passionate and still stay energized about what you're trying to do. If this is an 8 to 12 month process, as opposed to, you know, everybody working collectively, it just doesn't work as effectively if you can break it down into manageable pieces, and then you've got 4 working teams, or maybe it's 3 working teams, or maybe it's 5 working teams, but your coalition is that diverse group that's the guiding champion. Yes.
I missed all the stellar stuff because we retired here right after we did the stellar stuff. And so, I mean, I'm sure all these guys are used to working, you know, having these little teams and everything, but I've read other consultants' reports and stuff, and we all sort of always get to this big squishy stage and then kind of nothing happens after that. And what I've always felt, even when I see one little group will decide a path, or we should do this, whatever, I've never seen anything supported with data, that is data driven. And there's nothing wrong with, magical thinking to a certain level, but you started, I think, this whole thing last week talking about something, well, we want a Chick-fil-A or whatever, you're like, they're not coming here, get over yourself. And I think there are levels that we kind of have to all face together, what our data looks like, what's going to happen first before something else happens. It's not like you can say, I don't know, pick somebody, Google is going to suddenly put a big place here and hire a bunch of people making $150,000 a year. That's the kind of elephant hunting we want to try to do. We just all stay disappointed because it wouldn't happen. So sometimes I think it's that really, that detailed sort of initial work to then say, here are the first kinds of things we can do, and we can do it effectively to give ourselves some wins and some recognition and, a foot in the door that they're saying, hey, Marshall County's kicking some butt. Look who just, moved there. Or, I just don't feel, from what I've read, that we've ever had it to that kind of granular level where we really, really were connected on exactly what we were doing to do those next steps.
Well, and I can't speak for what you've done previously, but I can tell you from experience, when you have the individual working teams, if you've got a team or a focus group that is zeroed in on business attraction and development, it's going to be that team's responsibility to figure out, like we talked earlier under the themes, what's the best fit based off of data, based off of bringing some additional resources to the table that maybe you're not doing today. Because there's nothing wrong with dreaming, but you have to be realistic about it. And so we've already kind of explored some of the subsectors that might make sense, but each team then will break that down to figure out their own goals about how they're going to get to, if they want to do the knowledge-based subsector, whatever that means, then how are you going to get there?
Well, and that's kind of when I look at knowledge making, I have an issue with that term. But anyway, but the point is, I'd love to hear somebody working that you need 25 words or less. You're in front of an exact kind of company that you want to come about. Let me hear your pitch. What's your pitch to that company to move here? So
yeah, you're not ready for that yet. You don't
right, but I'm just saying that's always what I'm looking for. Like, where the hell am I going to come here? I want to know, because that's what I always think about. It's investment. If you're going to get my buy-in, if you couldn't get from me, some schmuck living in Culver, how are you going to get some knowledge-based company to relocate here unless you really understand what the fit is and why there's that connection? Otherwise, to me, it is just dreaming. It's kind of like you're starting the sentence. Wouldn't it be nice if, but that's not reality. You have to look at what you have, where you can start, and then potentially attract on top of that. And that to me is, I don't know whether we don't face it, but I just feel like I'll hear these ideas, but then I'd like to hear, okay, why do you think that architectural firm is going to suddenly move here and hire 25 people? I mean,
Because we're youth hockey and we're
right, right, exactly. That's the same thing. Right?
True.
I just want to hear the data that
Yeah,
supports
I
that
think
kind of move.
some of the answers are data driven, like if you can't, if they're, right now, we don't even have a workforce
Right.
to attract any
Right.
business.
It has to be an independent worker.
Right.
Yeah, but I do think part of the answer is quality of life. Your employees will have a great quality of life. They'll live in a safe community. They'll have access to great recreation. Right now, I'd love to be able to tell them they have access to great health-related resources, but we don't even have mental health resource in the county. So to me, that's part of the county level strategic planning and regional planning. But yeah, I like the coalition idea in terms of there is a coalition in the county, and I would call that the Crossroads team, which is what did Stellar. But locally, I think even though we had this great stellar committee, as we've implemented these projects, it's really the municipality implementing, all the money funnels through the municipality. And so even our stellar committee, we haven't met in 2.5, 3 years as a stellar committee. That's sort of a good foundation for, in addition to several of the people who participated in this, we do have that infrastructure here that I think we could, and as we develop this vision and plan, I think it would be interesting to see, like the South Bend Regional Partnership, they have a solid dozen committees or so. I've been to their steering committee meetings where literally each subcommittee chair says, this is the goal of our committee, and they remind the steering committee, and this is how we've made progress, and they go through some of the tasks they've been working on. It's really effective because then, 3 years from now, they can update all of those goals because they've already met those. So I kind of envision that for us locally if we could. And I know people are burned out, but it also, by us coming together the way we did the Stellar as sort of a coalition, it re-energizes people too. And we also all have a different network of people that we draw on, because sometimes I feel like we easily slip back into our silos like we did with Stellar. Oh, now we got to implement this thing. And I know there are days that I feel very much alone as a local leader. I'm sure Jonathan does on some level, except that we are connected to some regional people that have re-energized us as well. So I don't know what I'm getting at, but or how that even answers what you're talking about.
I'm also thinking about, just all the incredibly successful business people we have in this town who this is a level of something where they would engage. And I don't know how to say this, well, so sometimes when you've been a business person, so my career was in New York, and as Ginny knows, I'm always like, oh my God, you're kidding me. This is gonna take another week, I said to her, my life was about speed. I'm like, not the drugs, the actual pace. And so I'm very impatient to start things, get to things, so that we can start implementing stuff, right? And I feel like this is where the rubber meets the road now, right here. This is where all the hard work starts. And we've had people dance around this stuff, and I think trying to get everybody on the same page about what economic development means, but just what it entails. I've used the word relentless with Jonathan probably 20,000 times. I just don't think people get how relentless the work is. It's relentless. You have to have an outreach. You've got to be interacting with people. You've got to go drive to India and meet people. You have to go to Chicago. And if you don't have people kind of willing to do that, we're going to really, really have to promote ourselves because we are adorable, but out in the middle of nowhere. And I think there are some business people here who would help us. I think this would excite them because it's a bigger program. It's not just.
It'd be nice to take our message to them though too in an organized, professional way like we talked about earlier. If I'm going to approach business people on the lake or the Academy Network or somewhere in the region itself, I want to be able to say, this is our plan, this is our vision, come invest in it with us, be an advisor. A coalition of business advisors on top of our coalition would be fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
But shouldn't that kind of be what our chamber is? Some things we just haven't utilized what we do have.
To a degree, but this is, if you're talking about the town, town entity, and this is all the stuff which you're doing. We're going against other professional organizations as we go to do this. What I'm hearing is you set a standard of rules of the road. Here's how you play. You play ethically. You bring data to make your decisions. Your decisions are data-based decisions. You are accountable to what you do and the plan that you have committed to. Or each organization that's part of this or team that supports this has the same level of commitment. Then Jenny, what you're saying is, I call it a positive feedback loop. Other people will engage because I have my personal view. There are a lot of times I walked away from things because I was more interested in it than anyone else in the room, and it wasn't my project. And I'm not gonna do that. And I've walked away from things where I go, I could throw money at this, or I could throw my time at this, but it's gonna go nowhere, because they don't know what they're doing. So when you get that positive feedback loop, and again, it appears to be, because I went through all the past plans that we've done, and the projects that were undone were usually because people were not interested in them, or they couldn't figure out how to end them or show progress. So if we go with this, we do have to have it as a plan. We have to be as committed to it, and I don't doubt that people can be. We'll be as committed to it and articulate it, because you will bring other resources in. But it's a bit of a different approach. And not everyone may want to do it that way. And, you know, it gets hard, you'll rotate people out, but if you're making progress and you're doing this and you're accountable and visible to everybody, you'll bring other people in. As they say, I want to live here, I live here now, I want to be part of this, because I want to improve my life, my world here.
I'm kind of envisioning it like the Workforce Coalition, similar to what our Marshall County Community Roundtable is, except they focus on the nonprofits, and so this would be more like this roundtable where we bring the chamber, develop Culver, the town, Marshall County Economic Development, and we actually keep each other accountable, or, you know, have updates on what's going on. And I'll say even our Early Childhood Coalition hasn't met except once in, we haven't met at all in 2020, understandable with COVID, but we're in the hardest time of childcare history in preschool, and we haven't met once. We get these coalitions, and then, you know, we do like some amazing work, and then it just fizzles out.
I would hope that if you decide to go forward, you assign a champion. Somebody has to be, for somebody,
Even our support champion.
It's United Way, I mean, it's
Way too many hats.
although, I mean, the communities that have had success doing things like this, there are champions. And the teams are self-responsible. And then you've got a guiding group that is kind of the oversight. And, you know, by setting 30-day goals, each team sets a 30-day goal. So, you know, one of the things I think you'll have to do is figure out, you know, is this the right list? Can everybody buy into, these are some of the things that we need to address? Because if people can't buy in, they're not gonna get in, right? They're not gonna stay in. But, you know, maybe you pick 3 or 4 that you're gonna focus on, and some of this stuff feeds into the other, right? But each team works off of 30-day goals in addition to the broader overarching goal that your coalition has set for your vision. And that's how you see your success. And if by coming together each month to share and your progress and talk about what you've done over the last 30 days as the 4 teams or whatever the team number is, it keeps folks engaged. And hopefully it's also an avenue to tap additional resources of the brain power that's in the room, or the brain power that's not in the room, that each team is going to have their own resources, right? And their own group of people. It can't be the whole coalition being on all the, breaking up into individual teams either. So each team is going to be responsible with the strategic doing plan. Now again, but each team is responsible for creating their own team. Maybe there's a couple of you out of this overarching, if this becomes a guiding coalition, maybe you're really passionate about business development. So you're on this team. And then, you know, everybody has to decide, you know, who, you should have co-chairs, a couple of co-chairs, right? Who drive, they're responsible for leading their own goal in this, whatever the theme is that you're picking. Does that make sense? So you've got your overarching coalition who serves as kind of that guiding group, and it may be bigger than this group here. Again, we're talking about who's not at the table, who couldn't come or sit in for various reasons. But you need them at the table to go through this SOAR process, if you choose to do that. But once you break up into, you identify your top priorities as a community. These are the issues we're going to address over the next year, or whatever your timeline is that you think you can keep people engaged. And then you're going to look at task force, again, name your adjective, to address each of those. Each of them will have a couple of co-chairs. They'll set their own timelines. They'll have their own goals and strategies to address X. But each month, they're coming back as a whole group to report on progress or challenges or what have you.
Cheryl, how much, just on the economic development webinars that Paul and I attended, one was about hyper data centers, and I was thinking, oh, this is gonna be so cool, that I realized that's so beyond us.
Yeah.
So beyond us. But it was the guy who was doing the seminar was really interesting, and he and I had walked the same streets in New York. We had worked really near each other at the same time, so it was kind of fun to be on it. But then we did one on site development, and I realized, I don't know, diddly squat about site development and whether or not our sites are certified that we have that are on the MCEDC stuff. And I was like, how much do we all need to know that this imaginary group of doing? How much do we all need to understand that too? Or do we just depend on they and MCEDC?
Well, I think as a team.
Right, yes, exactly.
Yeah. As a team, I think you need to have a basic understanding. So, once these are identified and you're figuring out the overarching goal, and then you're figuring out some action steps for each of these, whatever these are, whatever that list ends up looking like, your priorities for your community, obviously there's probably going to be some learning that's going to have to take place. And then who are those subject matter experts that you can bring in? From a facilitation, obviously each of these groups, how many ever there are going to need help initially with facilitation and kind of thinking through process and helping. But eventually, the goal with strategic doing is that you're a fully functioning team of community working towards your own particular goal and setting your own action plans and measuring your own success with a reporting back to the overarching coalition. So yes, part of that is understanding what you need to know to make effective decisions to set those strategies in place.
I'm sorry, I know I'm asking a tough question.
That's okay.
I always do. So the other thing I would ask is that one thing Paul and I did during COVID, because you run out of things to do, is we got a database. And there's a guy here in town, like picked one for us with CRM, and then honestly custom designed it while we're on the phone with him. And it was so helpful, and we can't function without one. It's just kind of how we both worked in the business. So I have tons of stuff in there. But Jonathan has a really spiffy database. I can call him and say, hey, Jonathan, did this get issued yet? And he's like, look, hold me for 1 second. How much should a database be shared in something like this? Or, I'm not saying I want access to a town database, don't get me wrong, although I'd probably love it, but how much should maybe a central database be part of this process? Because sometimes talking to people, like you mentioned, IEDC before. Strangely enough, a woman who used to run it went to college with our town attorney. I don't know if you guys knew that.
Oh, yeah.
But, how much, if Jonathan, say, is talking to that person, but somebody else gets referred to her or him, talks to that person, to enter that in the database so people aren't stepping on each other's toes, or, I don't know, is there a database that somehow becomes a part of this?
I don't know. I think that's a question for you all to explore.
Because it kind of would be cool. I just don't know how many users you could have. It might get silly. But it's just an effective tool to make sure that people can go in and read kind of what's happening. Oh, Jonathan talked to so-and-so today and followed up on that thing. I don't even need to talk to Jonathan because I can see in the database that he followed up, right? That kind of thing. That it may be impossible because it may be too many users, but
well, and some things are proprietary too, right? So
that's what I mean, yeah.
But maybe there is some kind of network of resources that you build as a community coalition But again, it gets back to what we talked about earlier, asking people for money. I mean, the last thing you want, I don't want 15 people coming and knocking on my door for everything. I want that community to be strategic in how they approach me.
Yes.
What do they think I'm gonna be most passionate? I think Karen, you said, somebody did. What am I gonna be most passionate about that I'm gonna give to? Not that, you know, every Tom, Dick, and Harry sports team came and asked me and, you know, then the community, blah, blah, blah. It's about having some kind of strategy behind that. And I think going through a process and formulating your work teams, these are gonna be work teams. You're exactly right. The work begins now. You know, if you're burned out now, maybe your decision is we don't want to get engaged and go forward with something like this. Maybe we want to do a smaller, maybe we'll start with a workforce development team. Maybe that's the hanging fruit. We're gonna do that, just kind of start talking about talent. I don't know. But I think there are some additional conversations. I mean, you got a great leader.
Well, I think part of that action plan prioritizes. You know, all of us come to the table with some of our own personal priorities and passions and what we think needs to be done, but from a data standpoint, overall, we probably could very quickly figure it out just based on the work we did with Stellar and with Regional Stellar. There are definitely priorities raised to the top by default in that scenario. Workforce development, in my mind, is a really hot one because, in my opinion, we've neglected it as a region. Our Lido neglected it, wouldn't even share data on it. You know, they're talk about data-driven decision-making, but, and every time we try to engage, when we did Regional Stellar, we even had a workforce development committee that we thought the Lido should be in charge of. Well, that's exactly why he never even called a meeting. And we should have had somebody holding him accountable. That's a whole nother political story, but on the bottom line is, for me, that's how do you talk any company into coming here when, and we're competing with metropolitan areas for workforce, let alone the fact that we've ignored it.
Does it just sort of feel like sort of need the most help? I know that sounds like this is where we need the most help, right, with all that stuff. Because all of us, I think, Culver is kind of there. You have so many inquisitive people who want to do and learn, you know, they'll all show up. Then when you get to where the rubber meets the road, I think that's where we need more guidance to like take us to that next level where we're finally starting to implement this stuff where we understand, okay, we get it, now we're gonna.
Yeah, I
How to
think
take
having
those
the
next best steps.
expertise get us through all the way to that plan stage. That's one reason we looked at bringing in Cheryl. And I mean, I think it's even ironic, we've talked about Indiana State Economic Development, because the one time I asked the Lido if I could be connected, you know, introduce me to someone there. He acted like that's a big secret, no way, you know.
That's only for him to know.
Yeah, just even the SBDC, didn't even know they existed until I was reading a competitor's regional stellar plan and went, wait, what's that? So, you know, I have felt for years I've been behind the curve on a lot of this. And I agree with you that for us collectively is we convince the council and others that we need to invest in keeping Cheryl on board.
Yeah.
To get us through
I'm
these.
with you. I just think that like, this is where we just have to get pushed over to that. Because honestly, sometimes I'll say to Paul, like, I feel like every day I wake up and go, we lost another day, we lost another day, we lost, you know, because.
Yeah.
And things
Well,
happen.
if you're in the weeds and burned out, you don't feel that way.
We have another.
And, you know, the thing about doing a SOAR or a SWOT analysis is then you do have the data behind it. It doesn't, it's not saying, okay, we did, I'll use Paul's term, a preliminary couple of days of sessions, and these are our priorities as the whole town of Culver. And then, you know, instead of having that message, if you can say we pulled together a really diverse group of stakeholders and partners to address how we're going to take Culver from here to here. whatever that looks like, whether that's in population growth, which we already know is gonna be tough, whether it's talent development, business development, just storytelling in general, it helps saying, well, we did this and we had a fairly large group. I mean, we're talking with a SOAR or any kind of process like that, that could be a fairly large group of people. We could do multiple sessions on that just to make sure that Jenny, you and your town council and Jonathan, your whole team, that and your key leaders are all comfortable that we made every attempt to get the voice of our people here in the community.
I think it would be great to have some of the business people we've been referencing, you know, show up at that point, you know, where we're not just going through the, you know, but we're into the meat of it. So, because just the comments about financially, how things are impactful, when you have somebody who's been there, done that, it just always makes much more sense to have them sit there and make it rational about what you're talking about.
It's really been hard to reach that particular group, because I think, one, we have to build some credibility there, some trust. You know, we've had some business owners like Mark who have really stepped up. If we had that times 10, Brandy, and, you know, the same people will get involved with us, but I do think we have a level of trust and credibility that if we could extend that to some of these other resources, ultimately that's a goal. We've already got more people involved in this with COVID than we did when we were trying to attract people to the Stellar Committee. I think that's a plus. In some ways, I feel like, okay, we've built some capacity here maybe. And I would love for us to really move forward with a lot of this by engaging some of the younger people all the way to the high school level, because we have to keep building future capacity. So the chamber, if you have a young entrepreneur, they feel like they want to join the chamber and be welcomed into it, because my gosh, their arms are wide open, but those young people haven't been fully engaged to join us in these sorts of things. And I know they're out there, just from what we learned with Regional Stellar, and they really do have brilliant ideas. They're tech savvy. I mean, they probably whip out a database source in no time.
Or an app.
Yeah.
I got an app for that.
Yeah.
If you're gonna put art on the trail, here's a walking tour app, you know.
Hey, you know,
They already know how to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but I think we,
You are
I mean, at least by going
Make
through
them do
the process we went through with Stellar and the Regional Stellar plan, we have built some of that capacity in. And we have a regional leader from Argus sitting in on these meetings. So to me, that just says we've come a long way. So I'm very optimistic about it. I'm just thrilled that we're at this stage. I do want to have expertise guide us through it though.
I mean, agree.
I feel like I'm an expert on Stellar now, but none of this.
But it's so exciting. I mean, the whole topic is so exciting. I think that when people come and engage, I mean, I kind of like it when everybody's really opinionated, as long as they don't kill each other. But because I always think it's great to hear. I think you get smarter being challenged on what you think, and so I always like to have as many different thinkers in a room as possible. I think ideas.
I can't tell you how many times Mark opened my eyes to things that were not visible to me at all when we walked through the Stellar process. And even small decisions about if we're going to do a site visit with these state agencies, Mark just really pushed us on golf carts. Like, got to put them on the golf carts. That's what we experience around here. And I mean, I was like, oh, those stuffy state agents are probably going to hate that. And it was like the thing they loved the most. Yeah, and they experienced Culver the way a lot of us do.
Jenny, I grabbed this when I was over there filling my water up, and I'll tell you, I did not even know my business was in this. I looked through the Lakes magazine one day, and it talked about Montessori childcare, and it was something that like Develop Culver or Visit Culver put in. I never knew about it. This morning I had the most bizarre call at 6:45 a.m. An Amish man from Bremen called me about wondering if I could help with Amish disabled children childcare. because he saw my ad in the Lakes magazine. I mean, so we're impacting certain areas around and whatnot with our marketing, but if I don't even know that my business is in the future residence guide, I didn't even know there was a future residence guide.
And what
And
they're
I
saying
think
about,
and I wasn't tapped into what's going on in Culver, but that just shows what a lack of communication our key organizations were having the last couple of years, I would say. Because there was a time where I felt like I was tapped into things, but I think in-person networking is really important. You cannot hide behind email when you are a person that is in charge of an organization in this community. We all get so many emails, TGL, all these things, but like in-person networking, whether it's at a chamber dinner meeting or just calling up and saying, can I drop these guides off to you? I mean, that was not happening these last few years.
And I have to tell you, I took a lot of heat when I came out and said I wanted to do this. A lot of heat with some people because I said, if we're gonna own our economic development future, we need to own it. And part of the issue I saw was that we had people slipping right back into silos. Not
I feel like
communicating.
my business is
Yeah.
slipped back into the silo,
And-
and we worked so
And
hard the last few years.
a lot of organizations not necessarily collaborating or working together. And I even had council members who said, is this so that you can get all the organizations to get along? If that's why you're doing this, then leave me out of it. No, but the point being that whatever we're going to accomplish in terms of economic development, we're gonna do it a hell of a lot better if we're working together on the same page than if we are split into these silos. And I'm one of those people who doesn't tolerate it. I truly do believe in what Stellar taught us, that collaborative work is the solution. We got that done with Stellar. We brought millions of dollars into this community to do things we've never done. Imagine what we could do if we tackled economic development that way. Imagine what we could do if we continue to attack housing that way. Whatever the issue, I firmly believe in it, and I don't think I need to make that case with anyone. And I'm very willing to take the heat for it every single time. So, for all of you listening, bring the heat.
I think though that part of what we all maybe need to do, and I keep looking at Mark for this because we kind of talked about this at one point, but is to recruit a broader base of people to get involved. It's gonna take, that's just gonna take a little bit of effort, I think, but I think it's really important, and I just happen to be involved in two places that raise money. I'm kind of laughing because you see who donates, not like the same 150 people who donate for everything.
You see the different,
Right,
I
I mean,
mean, 10 different ones and it's all the same.
Right, you just laugh, there's Joe again, okay. And that says to me that that's a very small group that feels connected to some of the things that happen here. And, I just feel like some of us, and you're right, we need to have a pitch, and that's just one that, there's the economic development pitch to me, and then there's a pitch just to get involved, to get us there.
Yeah.
And I think some of that
And
has
we
to
need
happen.
help with that, because I'll tell you, when Jonathan and I talk about launching something like this, one, you're begging half the time, but the other half of the time is you know who you can rely on.
Yes.
I know the phone calls I can make to try to get people to come to the table. And because I have to be efficient with my time, because I am involved in so many different things, you go with whoever will show up, whatever warm body. So we need everybody building that capacity. It can't just be, the people who are so tapped out as it is. And that should be even one of our strategies, is that as we go through these sorts of things, constantly be building capacity.
Everybody
Well, and
brings
that's
somebody.
That's an excellent point, Jimmy, because it shouldn't always be you and Jonathan trying to make the phone calls, but instead hitting up those people, and oh, by the way, you need your +1. You all have your own network of resources and brain power and people. Again, it goes back to, sometimes people just need to be asked to get engaged.
So, looking at it from my perspective too, is that I've looked to get involved before in different things. Jonathan's posted thing, he's done a great job, I'll say this, and he posted some things of different committees you can be in. Now, I live on the South Shore, and so I can't be on certain committees. You have to live within town to be on.
Oh, you're talking
Okay.
like planning
So,
commission,
you know,
BZA.
I'm not objecting to,
Mhm.
you know, the process or what you do. But I see two things. One, I look to get involved. I asked Jonathan, here, any of these committees I can get on, you know, and get involved in one that could lead to another. But I didn't qualify for any, even though I do own land in town, I still can't be on it because it's not a residence.
Yeah.
The other thing that I see is, it's kind of like Shark Tank, right? You know, everyone has probably seen it, where the sharks won't get involved in the conceptual idea, or if it hasn't had any revenues or,
Mhm.
you know.
A plan.
Yeah, exactly. They want to get involved when it becomes actionable, okay, not theoretical. So I see a lot of this as theoretical, but in order to get to the actionable, I mean, Stellar, you never would have gotten to the actionable if you didn't go through the theoretical, right?
Right.
So,
Right.
so I think all of this is helpful in bringing in. But when you talk about, and again, I don't think we should ever make seasonal people feel like they're adversarial.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's wrong.
Well, and like Stellar, to me, any initiative like, I'm a community development manager in my actual day job. And I don't draw jurisdictional boundaries on community development, which is what we're really talking about here. Economic development as an edge, but so from that standpoint, forming a coalition like this isn't about a jurisdictional boundary.
Right.
Right.
If you happen to live on the south end of the lake, we don't want you, no, actually, we want you plus your 5 followers. So, and I
Well,
do
that's what I'm
appreciate
saying, that's
that
why I-
about Culver. I think we could have never won Stellar had we been limiting in how we went about the collaborative work.
Mhm.
And I think that's the advantage of doing community development. I mean, I hope your takeaway from both of these days is that economic development is just broader than business development. It is community development, it's talent development, it's all of that. So we can call it a community development initiative, or you can call it whatever you want. Some of the things that you've talked about with regards to getting involved at the local town level, those are legislated. What we're talking about here is Culver as an overall entity or municipality or whatever you want to call it. And we can even look beyond the municipal boundaries of the town, because we're going to be talking about the 30,000 foot level and then drilling down on whatever the priorities end up being. So it has nothing to do with jurisdiction.
Sure.
So it's
And I
a
think
completely
that's where-
different animal than, you know, serving on a
Sounds like
BCA or something.
That's where you might be able to get more people involved.
Yeah.
Once it becomes actionable.
Yeah.
To tell them, hey, we need help with this.
Yeah.
Okay, a lot of people want to get involved in the theoretical, right?
That's
Once
true.
you-
Yeah.
Once you narrow it down to the actionable items that, hey, we can use their talents, if they're in real estate or if they're in.
I think we have a coalition name,
You do?
Culver Community Development Coalition.
Ooh, somebody write that down.
Sound
That's amazing.
Well, I think this has been
good?
fantastic.
Step one's done. What's
The
our
name-
vision?
the hardest part.
That's right. We're gonna go from good to great. We're done.
We are an hour past what we promised you, so first I'll apologize for that, but second, I just want to applaud all of you for the great discussion and comments and thoughtful thinking about how do we raise the level of all votes for the town. I mean, obviously, you wouldn't have spent 2 Fridays here, Fridays. The last one, which was absolutely gorgeous, and you were inside, if you didn't care. And so it starts there. And so I think next steps are just figuring out, providing, maybe Jonathan, you know, you and Jenny and I can think about some questions and send out another few questions about, are you in? Do you feel this is the right direction? Give some support to Jenny if she's gonna fight to move forward and be that catalyst of change. She's going to need a team to help her do that. And that team is going to be broader than all of you here and all of you folks online. So it goes back to the comment about, oh yeah, you come and bring your +1, because we've got some work to think about and do. Sound like a,
Sounds good.
okay.
Thanks everyone online for sticking in there and hanging with us today. We appreciate it. And thank you, all of you in the room.
Who's the guy that's got the say?
Tony.
That's Tony, the landscape.
Hi, Tony.
Hi, Tony.
What do I have?
But thanks again, and if you don't mind, we will send out a few questions, because we want to know that you're going to help fly cover for this, and that there is buy-in to move forward.